So, Roger, what was going on for you 50 years ago?
50 years ago, April 1974, I would have been completing a year teaching at the University of San Francisco, what was then called San Francisco State, in the Broadcast Communication Arts Department, where I had a post for a year replacing another guy on a sort of another professor. And they gave me I was teaching writing, and I was the faculty advisor to the radio station, but they also gave me a graduate seminar in paracommunications. Paracommunications being to communications what parapsychology is to psychology, namely an exploration of the outer edges, shall we say, of the discipline. And I spent that year essentially cruising the Bay Area itself, a time and a city awakening to what was essentially the new consciousness. And it was in that context that I first heard about Findhorn. A guy called John White, who wrote a book called The Highest State of Consciousness, concluded his book with a chapter on Findhorn, where he talked about 42-pound cabbages as a tangible sign on the physical level of the presence of God.
Can't do better than that.
It's one of those claims that sort of get your attention.
So you talk about the new consciousness. How has the new consciousness evolved in the last 50 years? So what do you think of now as the new consciousness?
Well, at that time, it was definitely in a period of awakening. It was my view is that it was evoked largely by many people's experience with psychedelic drugs, which essentially facilitated a mystical experience, albeit chemically. The kind of experiences people were having under the influence of LSD and mescaline were analogous, shall we say, to the kind of experiences that mystics described, mostly medieval mystics. In other words, there weren't a lot of them before LSD, but all of a sudden we were all having these remarkable experiences of oneness, of energy. Someone described an LSD trip as basically realizing they were all just energy in packages. And I still think that's a very profound observation.
Interesting enough, Roger, I'm currently reading this book, The Mystics, by
real deal,
by Andrew Harvey. Well, it's taking stuff from our old friends in the the Theosophical Society right through to Buddhism, and also Sri Aurobindo. The stuff on Sri Aurobindo is pretty powerful. In his vision for a transformed world, a transformed cosmos, as it were. And so I find that I personally find that pretty inspiring.
Absolutely.
I also felt for many years, Roger, that you're the sort of conscience of the community. You ask difficult questions and force us to look at ourselves when we would rather hide in some diversion. And I just wondered if you relate to that idea of being the conscience of the community.
Let's just say that I often felt like what I thought were crucifixion experiences. But I have more consistently identified with Socrates, because, as you may recall, Socrates' role was to ask the awkward and leading questions. which has eventually inspired Plato to wax lyrical about the nature of the one. Right. The good, the true, and the beautiful converging into one. Marvelous stuff. All of that stuff, of course, was my history. I mean,
Yeah.
I did a PhD in philosophy before I arrived here, and I can remember one of my professors, arguing whether Plato was a rationalist or a mystic, and that
Yeah.
question is still open and
It's still going around. Andrew
Exactly.
Harvey has exactly the same question. So, how did you get into climate change? What's the story behind that, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, I convened a total of 10 conferences here at Finhorn, international conferences. And in every case, we would be looking at some theme which seemed to be unique, not to us, but to be mirrored in the larger world. And we would have these events where we would basically get together and compare notes on what we were experiencing and seeing and so forth. Well, I can remember doing a series of conferences, both in the late 90s, in the late 80s, actually. I remember doing one in the late 80s called Politics as if the Whole Earth Mattered.
Yeah.
And in fact, we went to Russia before. I think you were part of that group, weren't you?
No, I've never been to Russia.
Okay. Well, a lot of the current fellows and trustees, and plus Liza, went to Russia as a preparation for that. Anyway, I was always observing what was moving in the larger world, and we had this remarkable guy from London, the violinist, whose name escapes me. Anyway, he could put together the contraction and convergence.
Oh yeah.
Theory.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came several times, and as I remember that as he came, it became clear to me that climate was really the real issue. If anything was going to catalyze the kind of transformational change which we spoke about and which we imagined endlessly, really, it would be climate change, because it's the one thing that is sufficiently comprehensive, and it will, and all inclusive. It requires the kind of transformation that we've been dreaming of and trying to model in many respects in the community.
And do you think you've been able to sort of, I mean, I think you're absolutely right and spot on. How are you at present trying to frame this with the community to realize that this is on the physical world, a major task that is reflected in our inner worlds as something that we urgently need to put our attention both in an inner and outer way. How do you see that in the community now?
Well, much as I hate to admit it, there's no excuse. There's no substitute for behavior change. What we eat, how we travel, how we heat our houses. These are the things which matter and which make a difference. We've got to transition from the fossil fuel economy to renewable economy, and that involves all of us taking appropriate steps to reduce our carbon footprint, and to offset accordingly. And it's a difficult sell. It's a very difficult sell. I think in addition to that, of course, it also involves institutional change. The kind of things that you like to obsess about. District heating schemes, new solar new solar arrays, new wind turbines, electric charging points, electric cars, all these things, which are very expensive, unfortunately. Behavior change, cheap, but very difficult to achieve. Institutional change, excellent, but it won't solve the problem. Unfortunately, it'll take us down the road, but it's very expensive. That's the mainstay. And I also follow. I read a lot about what's happening in the larger world. I get a digest of all the articles that pertain to climate issues every day, several of them, in fact. The world is having comparable difficulty in making the shift. And it's a really open question as to whether we're going to pull it off. And unfortunately, the odds are not terribly favorable, but we can do it if we put our minds to it.
Yeah.
And our will.
So, what would you like to see happening on an inner and outer level within our community, in the next 5 years, which is going to be critical for the whole evolution of the climate change issue?
Well, this is interesting. It's very topical. We're engaged in this local place plan process, which emerged from something called the Development Committee, which John Talbot came back from Sydney to help us complete, because he promised he would do it in the 90s. And he wanted to get it done. But anyway, it's been an ongoing process now for the last couple of years, trying to look at where we want to go over the course of not just the next 5 years, but the next 15 years. I mean, the local place plan, which Murray Council puts out periodically, will cover the period from 2027 to 2037. So we're really looking now at what the future, what we want to do for the next 15 years. And it involves all the stuff that you would consider. I mean, land and buildings and development and infrastructure and the whole portfolio of development issues. But included amongst them are the climate question, because when I got a grant from the National Lottery a couple of years ago to help me present the climate challenge to the community, we managed to secure a commitment to become carbon neutral as a community by 2032. So I'm beginning to, I have recently been appointed the title holders representative on the local place plan group, in which capacity I will have an opportunity to poke, prod, and remind people of what's required. But, what that will entail remains to be seen. I mean, the crucial question, one of the crucial questions I have at the moment is sustainability a spiritual undertaking? Because the community continues to identify itself primarily as a spiritual community. And the question is, well, what does spirituality entail and imply where climate change is concerned? And we have yet to discover or answer that question, at least as a collective.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think we need to bang the drum a bit over the next period, because there's a lot of changes happening to the community or in the community. So that's a drum that we need to bang, because it's coming towards us, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. Yes. I do have this kind of abiding, cherished dream, hope, fantasy that we can find a way to respond to the challenge in a way that will deepen our sense of connection as a community.
Yeah.
And also make us something that, will be exemplary where the larger world is concerned. And I think we need places like that. And I think that Findhorns has long seen itself as being, a response to where the world is and what the world could be doing. And in that respect, I just certainly hope that it includes the climate agenda, because if it doesn't, then basically we're just
Toast.
toast. Yes, that's correct. Irrelevant, unfortunately.
Roger, thank you. I've enjoyed discussing, and you're the conscious, I think you're the conscience of the community, but you're also the intellectual heart of the community. And you've held that banner for all these years, and I salute you for that.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Right, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.